In the pouring rain, a billionaire woman stood frozen, clutching her umbrella so tightly her knuckles turned white. Just a few steps ahead of her, her only daughter, dressed in a rain-soaked designer coat worth more than most people's yearly income, sat cross-legged on the pavement, laughing, listening, and learning from a boy no older than 12. His shoes were torn, his hands were dirt-stained, and his shirt clung to him like paper from the storm. Yet, in his voice was something powerful, something that made her daughter's eyes light up in a way money never had. She felt her heart twist with confusion. Who was this boy? Why was her daughter drawn to him with such trust, such eagerness? And what truth could possibly hide behind a child who appeared to have nothing, yet carried himself with the quiet strength of someone who had seen far too much of life? She didn't know it yet, but what she would discover about him would not only shatter her own assumptions, it would send shockwaves across her entire community. Because sometimes the ones society overlooks the most are the ones holding the deepest wisdom, the most painful truths, and the quietest strength. But before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Victoria was a woman who had spent her life building walls. Not just the tall iron gates that guarded her estate, or the security cameras that traced every corner of her mansion, but invisible walls, walls of discipline, of wealth, of perfection. She believed everything had to be in its place. Her home was a gallery of success, polished floors that reflected chandeliers, tables decorated with flowers replaced fresh every morning, and a silence that echoed through hallways far too large for 3 people. To the outside world, she was admired, she was respected. Some even envied her. But those who lived closest to her, those who called her mother, often felt her presence as more of a shadow than a light. Her daughter, Sophia, was only 11. A bright-eyed girl with soft brown hair, a gentle smile, and a curiosity that could never quite be contained. She grew up in the lap of luxury, yet often felt as though her life was missing something that no amount of money could buy. Tutors came and went. Lessons in piano, in French, in etiquette were scheduled neatly into her calendar. Yet for all her instruction, Sophia struggled in school. Numbers blurred in her head. Sentences broke apart before they could make sense. And no matter how hard she tried, the adults around her seemed to see her only as a reflection of her mother. Someone expected to be perfect. But Sophia wasn't perfect. She was human. And she felt invisible inside the mansion that was supposed to be her home. Then there was Eli, 13 years old, no home, no polished floors or chandeliers, no private tutors or chauffeurs. His home was the street corner, his bed the unforgiving concrete beneath bridges, or the cold wooden benches of a bus stop. But what Eli did have was something most people never noticed, an extraordinary mind. In the absence of textbooks, he used scraps of paper he found tossed aside in trash bins. When there was no paper, he found chalk or broken stones to scrawl equations onto the pavement. He had no teacher but memory, snippets of lessons from years before his life had fallen apart, combined with an unshakable determination to not let hardship erase what he knew. And so, while most walked past him with pity or disgust, Eli kept writing, solving, thinking. It was on one of those afternoons that Sophia first noticed him. Her driver had dropped her a few blocks away from her school. The car stalled in traffic. From the back seat, her eyes wandered to the sidewalk, where she saw a boy crouched low, drawing lines and numbers with chalk. At first she thought he was playing, but then she realized he was solving problems, real ones, complicated ones. She pressed her face closer to the window, fascinated. His clothes were torn, his hands filthy, yet the way he moved, careful, precise, confident, was unlike anyone she knew. Day after day, she looked for him. Sometimes she begged her driver to take the longer route, just so she could catch a glimpse. And slowly, something inside her began to shift. Here was a boy who had nothing, yet his eyes carried a spark she longed for. A spark she had never felt in her own classrooms. Sophia began to wonder, why did learning look so different in his world than in hers? Why did his voice, though unheard by society, feel louder to her than all the polished lessons money had ever bought? It was curiosity that pulled her closer. But what she didn't know was that this small act, watching a boy with chalk-stained fingers on a broken sidewalk, would ignite a chain of events that would shake both of their worlds. Sophia had always been the kind of child who obeyed. She was raised in a world where rules were not suggestions but commandments, where order was expected, and where even small mistakes were met with sharp glances and heavy silence. But for the first time in her young life, Sophia found herself breaking those unspoken laws. After school, while the driver waited by the gates, she slipped quietly through side streets, her small shoes splashing in shallow puddles, her heart racing with both fear and excitement. She told herself she only wanted to watch him again, just for a few minutes. But minutes turned into hours, and hours became days. Each time she found Eli crouched in the same spot, his knees scraped, his shirt clinging to his thin frame, his hair damp from mist or rain. And yet, he always had that same determination, drawing shapes, numbers, and strange riddles onto the ground. It didn't take long for him to notice her. At first, he said nothing, just a glance, a flicker of awareness. But Sophia kept coming back, and eventually curiosity broke his silence. "Do you know this one?" he asked one day, pointing to a riddle scrawled in chalk. His voice was soft, almost hesitant but steady. Sophia shook her head, and he smiled faintly. "It's okay, I'll show you." And from that moment, something began to grow between them. Their lessons were nothing like the ones Sophia endured at home. Eli never scolded, never demanded perfection. Instead, he told stories to explain numbers, used pebbles as counters, and turned riddles into games. For the first time, learning felt like a discovery, not a punishment. Sophia laughed, a real laugh, the kind that came from her belly, not the polite giggle expected at her mother's dinner parties. And Eli, though cautious at first, found himself laughing too. In those stolen afternoons, they built something neither of them had before: warmth. But what Victoria didn't know was that her daughter's secret meetings would soon expose a truth darker than she ever imagined. Because while Sophia felt invisible at home, Eli made her feel seen. While her mother's mansion was filled with silence heavy enough to suffocate, the sidewalk with Eli was alive, with questions, with laughter, with possibility. He taught her how to see patterns in the stars, how to listen to the rhythm of rain against rooftops, how to solve problems not just with numbers, but with patience. For Sophia, it was freedom. For Eli, it was connection. And yet, shadows were growing. Their world of chalk and riddles, though innocent, was fragile. One afternoon, as Sophia leaned closer to solve a puzzle Eli had drawn, a figure across the street stopped and stared. Neither of them noticed. They were too wrapped up in their secret world, but eyes were watching, quietly, closely. And one afternoon, someone else was watching them. That someone would not stay silent for long. Sophia's secret had begun to slip beyond her control. For weeks, Sophia thought her secret was safe. Each afternoon she slipped away. Each evening she returned home with damp shoes and a smile she couldn't hide. She grew lighter, happier, as though the weight that once pressed against her young shoulders had lifted. She laughed more at the dinner table. She spoke with a confidence her tutors had never drawn out of her. But in Victoria's world, nothing went unnoticed. Her daughter's sudden change, the quiet joy in her eyes, the mysterious sense of freedom she carried. It didn't add up. And suspicion, once planted in Victoria's mind, grew like ivy until she could no longer ignore it. One rainy afternoon, Victoria's car stopped at the corner. She had left her office earlier than usual, determined to see for herself what her daughter was hiding. And there, under the gray sky, she saw it. Sophia, kneeling in the puddled street, laughing at something drawn in chalk. Beside her stood Eli, his hands moving animatedly as he explained some puzzle only the two of them seemed to understand. The sight froze her. For a moment, she didn't believe it. Then fury rushed in. Victoria stormed from the car, heels splashing in the water, her umbrella snapping open above her. Her voice, sharp and commanding, cut through the rain. "Sophia, what are you doing here?" The little girl spun around, her laughter vanishing, her face draining of color. Eli straightened, his eyes wide, his body tense like a cornered animal. Victoria's gaze fell on him, her anger flaring. "And you," she hissed, pointing at him, "how dare you touch my daughter?" Her words rang louder than the thunder above. Pedestrians turned their heads. The boy stepped back, trembling, his mouth opening but no words coming out. Sophia scrambled to her feet, her small hands balled into fists. Her voice cracked, but her courage held. "Don't yell at him, Mother. He teaches me better than anyone else does." The declaration hung in the air like a spark. Victoria's breath caught, her anger colliding with disbelief. For the first time, her daughter had raised her voice against her. For the first time, Sophia had chosen someone else. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the rain pattering against the pavement. Eli stood frozen, unsure if he should run or stay. Victoria's face hardened, her pride wounded, her control slipping. Her voice, low and seething, cut through the moment. "You will never see this boy again. Do you hear me, Sophia? Never." The girl's eyes filled with tears, but she did not look away. Eli, standing a step behind her, felt the sting of those words pierce deeper than the cold rain ever could. In that moment, 3 lives collided, one bound by power, one by defiance, and one by desperation. And none of them would walk away unchanged, because what Victoria believed was the end was only the beginning. Victoria was not the kind of woman to leave questions unanswered. The image of her daughter kneeling beside a ragged boy, laughing as though he were family, gnawed at her in ways she could not admit. That night, long after Sophia had retreated to her room in silence, Victoria sat alone in her study, the rain still rattling against the tall glass windows. She had made a call earlier to someone who owed her favors. Information was power, and if she could not control her daughter's heart, she would at least control the truth about the boy who had stolen it. By morning, the reports came, and what she read did not just surprise her, it unsettled her. The boy's name was Eli, 13 years old, orphaned in all but name. His father had once been an employee of her late husband, a man Victoria had built her fortune beside. Eli's father was not just any worker, he was loyal, hard-working, trusted. But when her husband died, the story changed. Contracts were buried, promises broken, families like Eli's discarded. One decision, made in the name of profit, had left them with nothing. Eli's father lost his job, his mother soon after her health. Within a year, the family had collapsed, forced into the streets, and now, years later, it was their son, the boy of that family, that Victoria's daughter had chosen. The papers trembled in her hand. She felt the weight of shame she had never carried before. Because if these reports were true, then the wealth she guarded so fiercely, the life of perfection she demanded from her daughter, had been built not just on hard work and sacrifice, but also on betrayal. Eli was not just a boy from the streets. He was living evidence of what had been taken, a walking reminder of debts unpaid. Victoria pushed the papers aside, but the truth lingered like smoke she could not escape. How could she face her daughter, knowing the boy she had forbidden her from seeing was, in some way, her family's responsibility? And how could she face herself, knowing her fortune might be tied to his suffering? The realization shook her more than she cared to admit. For years she had prided herself on discipline, order, reputation. But the sins of the past had found their way back to her doorstep, in the form of a boy with chalk-stained fingers and a mind far greater than the world had given him credit for. Her first instinct was to tighten her grip, to bury the truth as deeply as possible. But even as she tried, her daughter's words echoed in her ears. He teaches me better than anyone else does." Those words burned with a truth she could no longer ignore, and this was only the beginning, because secrets, once unearthed, do not remain silent for long. And what Victoria was about to learn would not only challenge her pride, it would force her to decide whether she was willing to sacrifice her fortune, her reputation, and the very walls she had built to finally make things right. If you are here, comment with "I'm here." Let's see who's really watching with us to this point. Victoria could not escape the weight of what she had learned. For days, she carried herself with the same polished poise, her voice sharp, her presence commanding. But behind closed doors, the papers about Eli's family remained spread across her desk, a silent reminder that her fortune had not been as clean as she once believed. Guilt pressed against her pride, and pride refused to let it show. She told herself she was protecting Sophia, that she was shielding her daughter from a dangerous world. Yet deep down, she knew she was also protecting herself, from shame, from exposure, from the truth of choices made long before Sophia could ever understand. Meanwhile, Eli kept his distance. Victoria's warning had been clear, and though Sophia begged him not to disappear, he refused to risk another confrontation. But distance did not end what had begun. From the other side of the street, from alleys and corners where he thought no one could see, Eli continued to watch over Sophia. When she lingered after school, he found ways to slip her riddles written on scraps of paper. When she struggled with a problem, he would mark answers in chalk where he knew she would find them the next day. It was teaching from a distance, silent but steady, a language only the two of them shared. And Sophia, once frustrated, once overlooked, began to change. At her desk in school, she raised her hand with answers she had never dared to speak before. Her teachers noticed, her grades climbed, and every time she succeeded, her heart whispered a single truth. It was Eli who believed in her, Eli who showed her she was more than her mistakes, Eli who taught her that learning could be joy. She wanted to shout it to the world, but at home, silence ruled. The whispers outside the mansion walls, however, grew louder. Neighbors began to talk. Parents at school raised eyebrows. In hushed tones they asked, "What is a billionaire's daughter doing with a boy from the streets?" Some called it reckless. Others called it shameful. For those obsessed with status, it was scandal waiting to erupt. Victoria heard the whispers too, and every word was another crack in the image she had fought her entire life to maintain. Her pride told her to put an end to it, to shut the door forever. But guilt whispered differently, that maybe the boy deserved more than her contempt, that maybe Sophia's happiness was worth more than reputation. She stood between two choices, both unbearable. To the world, she was still in control, but inside, she was unraveling. And yet, the story was far from over, because what Victoria did next would silence every whisper and change both families forever. The night of the school showcase arrived, a polished event designed for parents to display their children's achievements. The hall glittered with chandeliers, polished floors reflecting the glow of wealth and expectation. Rows of parents in tailored suits and jeweled dresses sat upright, their eyes sharp, their whispers sharper. For Victoria, this was supposed to be the moment her daughter finally proved herself, the moment Sophia carried the family name with pride. When Sophia's turn came, she walked to the stage clutching her papers nervously, her heart pounding in her small chest. For a moment she faltered, her eyes scanning the sea of strangers until they landed on a familiar figure lingering near the back wall. Eli. He had slipped in quietly, unnoticed by most. The sight of him steadied her. Taking a breath, Sophia began, not with hesitation, but with conviction. She presented her project, solved her equations, and spoke with clarity no one had ever expected from her. The crowd applauded politely, some with surprise, but when the host asked what had inspired her improvement, Sophia's answer pierced the room. "It wasn't the tutors. It wasn't the lessons at home," she said, her voice trembling but strong. "It was Eli. He taught me. He believed in me when no one else did." The applause died instantly. Gasps rippled through the audience. Heads turned, eyes narrowing toward the ragged boy at the back. Teachers frowned, parents whispered with disdain. The whispers grew louder, crueler. "A street boy?" one mother muttered. "Disgraceful." "She's been learning from a beggar," another hissed. Laughter, sharp and humiliating, cut through the air. Eli's face flushed red. He looked down, his body shrinking under the weight of 100 eyes. Humiliation burned deeper than the hunger he had endured on the streets. For a moment, he thought of running. But before he could move, a new sound filled the hall, Victoria's voice. Strong, unshaken, louder than the crowd. "Enough!" The room fell silent. She rose from her seat, every eye now fixed on her. Her face was unreadable, but her words carried a weight that silenced even the boldest critic. "This boy you mock, this child you look down upon, has done more for my daughter than all of your wealth and all of your pride combined. If you see shame in him, then the shame is yours, not his." The crowd stirred, stunned. Never had they seen Victoria defend anyone with such fire, let alone a boy from the streets. Eli's eyes widened, confusion battling with disbelief. Sophia's heart leapt. For the first time, her mother had chosen not reputation, but truth. And then, the twist no one expected. Victoria stepped forward, her gaze firm, her voice unwavering. "Eli will not be humiliated any longer. From this day on, I will see that he receives not only a scholarship, but a home, legal guardianship. What was taken from his family will be restored." Gasps erupted again, this time louder. Some shook their heads, others whispered furiously, but none of it mattered. In that moment, Victoria had made her choice. Pride had given way to redemption, and in front of the entire community, she bound her legacy not to wealth, not to power, but to justice. The hall, once filled with whispers, now stood in stunned silence, and 3 lives, Victoria's, Sophia's, and Eli's, shifted forever. The days that followed were unlike anything Eli had ever known. No longer did he sleep under bridges or scribble equations on crumbling sidewalks. For the first time, he had a roof over his head, books of his own, and a seat at the very table where he once would have been turned away. His eyes, once dimmed by hardship, now carried the steady light of hope. Sophia, too, was transformed. She no longer measured her worth by the brand of her shoes or the grandeur of her home. Instead, she carried with her the lessons Eli had given freely, that kindness, resilience, and courage outweighed privilege. She walked with a new kind of confidence, one not born of wealth, but of gratitude. And Victoria, once cold, distant, and consumed by appearances, was humbled in ways she could never have imagined. She learned that true power is not found in the walls of a mansion, nor in the weight of a fortune, but in the courage to right a wrong, and the compassion to open her heart. As whispers in the community turned from scandal to admiration, the bond between the 3 grew stronger. They were no longer just a billionaire lady, her daughter, and a boy from the streets. They were a family, rebuilt, redefined, and redeemed. And in the end, it wasn't wealth that taught Sophia the greatest lessons. It wasn't tutors, nor polished schools, nor the shadow of her mother's empire. It was the boy who had nothing, yet gave everything. So now I'll leave the question with you. Did Victoria make the right choice? Was this true justice for Eli's family? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that compassion can change everything.